Starship's 10th flight took to the skies just under a week ago, and SpaceX is already setting the stage for the next and final flight of the Block 2 ships. At the same time, it's preparing the next generation of vehicles and the pad where version 3 will be launching from. We also got further information from Elon as well on the 4th generation of Starships, and there was a whole lot of other work that we just didn't get to cover because of Starship Flight 10. Howdy Star fans, I'm Beyer for NSF. Get ready, this is going to be a jam-packed Starbase update, sponsored by Henson Shaving. Thanks to Flight 10's 2 consecutive scrubs, we unfortunately didn't have enough time for a Starbase update episode last week. We did have an almost 10-minute summary and recap of the flight on the latest episode of This Week in Spaceflight, including some of the flap damage analysis and the status of Ship 37's heat shield after re-entry. You should check it out if you haven't done so already. With Starship's success on Flight 10, now it kind of feels like we need more. So where are we on the path towards Starship Flight 11? Well, we think SpaceX will be reusing Booster 15 on that flight, given that Booster 17 has been sitting in the rocket garden for quite a while with no visible work done on it. There's also the fact that Booster 15 already has engines on it and has flown before, so it'll be a lot easier to get it ready for flight rather than Booster 17. Booster 15 is currently in the middle workstation inside Mega Bay 1, and at some point we expect it'll head out to the launch site to get static fired and checked out before the next flight. Ship 38 remains inside Mega Bay 2, hidden in the corner, and has been getting further prepared for flight. Now, for the next flight to happen, these two vehicles will need to be tested, and until Massey's is fully up to speed again, both Booster 15 and Ship 38 will be tested at the launch site. Just an hour after Flight 10 happened, teams had returned to the pad and started inspecting the launch mount. We also saw the return of the dance floor to the pad, and teams quickly set up scaffolding on the launch ring, as expected. Another thing that SpaceX did was reinstall the booster alignment pins back onto the launch mount. These pins are located on the deck of the mount and are used to aid in the installation and removal of the booster when it's lifted by the chopsticks. These always get removed prior to flight, because otherwise they'd get super roasted during launch, and unlike the booster quick disconnect, they're not made to survive that. Given that no work has been done yet on installing all of the McGregor hardware that was built for testing Ship 37 and now Ship 38 at the pad, it's very likely that SpaceX will first test the booster and then convert the mount to test Ship 38. Oh, also, a large LR-11000 crane at the pad got woken up after Flight 10 so it can continue helping with Pad 2 work. Ahead of Starship's 10th flight, we were all expecting what Elon had called a, and I quote, live technical update on Starship. SpaceX even prepared an X-Spaces for it on August 24th before the first launch attempt, but it was canceled. Elon did eventually talk during the Monday attempt, along with SpaceX's Vice President of Starship Engineering, Bill Riley. But it ended up being another general overview of the program, aimed more at the general public than some of us rocket nerds. And look, I get it. You need to pitch the program, and you need the general public's consent and buy-in to get this thing off the ground, literally and figuratively. Just don't call it a technical update if it's not a technical update. In other words, there was nothing new in it other than some old shots of the Starfactory from a few weeks ago. We know they're old because they show the grid fin they posted about earlier this month, the forward dome of the Booster 18.3 test tank that we'll talk about later in the episode, and Ship 39's nose cone still without flaps or tiles, which it has a lot of now. It has 2 flaps, a lot of tiles. Now, SpaceX's coverage of Flight 10 did give us a few more insights into certain things, but before going into all that, here's a word from our video's sponsor. Even when I have a beard like this, I actually shave a lot, my head and my neck, which is especially tricky. Henson Shaving, our sponsor for this video, thankfully makes a razor that makes shaving trivial, even fun and relaxing. Compared to multi-bladed monstrosities that just cost a bunch and hurt and annoy you, the AL-13 is a joy to use. I'd be using their razor even if they weren't a sponsor, because I just prefer it. I've even been shaving way more since I started using it over a year ago, and I now enjoy shaving as part of my self-care routine more than ever. Plus, even though I've been shaving way more, the blades are like 10 cents each, so I've been spending way less. And finally, for all the space nerds out there watching this, that's all of you, their razors are made in an aerospace-grade machine shop, and they're not just saying that. They've been making parts for large aerospace projects for 20 years, including parts for the ExoMars rover and for the OneWeb constellation. Their razors even look like aerospace hardware. I mean, who doesn't love a finely machined part? So support NSF and give yourself or someone you love the joy of a truly great shave today. Click the link in the description or go to hensonshaving.com/spaceflight and use code SPACEFLIGHT at checkout. You'll get 100 free blades with the purchase of a razor. That's like 3 years worth of shaves. I haven't even made a dent in the ones they sent me. Thanks again to Henson Shaving for making a great product and for sponsoring this video. During the launch attempt on Monday, Dan Howitt from SpaceX Communications confirmed that the first ship sent to Mars won't have landing legs and will land on their skirts. Eventually, legs would be fitted on later ships once landing on Mars is proven to work. Remember when we saw all those renders back in May of Starships landed on Mars without legs? And we all joked that the render team had just forgotten about the legs? Turns out those renders were not wrong, and they are indeed going to try and land directly on the skirt, just like SN10. I just hope those Starships don't end up the same way as SN10. Another thing that we got was a newer render of Starlink deployment from Starship. Yes, we already saw Ship 37 deploying the simulators on Flight 10, but in this render in particular, it seems to be showing a Block 3 ship. This is because a few of the features shown on that ship, like the dual quick disconnect ports, the lack of shields on the Raptors in the opening sequence, the relocated catch pins and Starlink terminals, as well as the absence of the lifting socket from Block 1 and Block 2 ships. Despite not getting a technical update from Elon, he did post some updates on X after the flight that are quite relevant. For example, he posted this chart with some new numbers on the different versions of Starship that have flown and that are planned for the future. Some numbers were already known, such as propellant capacity and number of engines, since that was all shown in the May presentation. It is interesting, though, that we get an estimate on payload to orbit for all 4 versions of Starship. In its current version 2, Starship would be capable of launching 35 metric tons to low Earth orbit, compared to the 15 metric tons for the older version 1, and the more than 100 metric tons that SpaceX wants to get to for version 3. Now, you might remember from early last year this slide that talked about Starship 2 and Starship 3. Well, the version dubbed here as 2 is now actually version 3. Version 2 ended up working more as an interim version to bridge the gap between versions 1 and 3. The ship got a bit stretched, and a whole lot of other things were changed on it as well, such as the flaps, propellant lines, the heat shield, and much more. But the booster remained pretty much the same. So of course, the boost in performance wasn't that much compared to version 1. Now, for Starship version 3, the booster will be the one with the bigger change, as it'll be a bit stretched. We'll have an integrated hot staging structure, and will be fitted with the much more powerful Raptor 3 engines. The ship will also see some upgrades and changes specifically for reusability and future in-orbit refilling, but it'll remain pretty much the same size, with the major change that it's going to use Raptor 3 as well. With the more powerful and more efficient engines, as well as a larger propellant capacity, hopefully version 3 will meet the goal of getting to 100 metric tons to low Earth orbit. Now the other version, version 4, is of course one for much later down the line. In that case, both the ship and the booster will be stretched, and in that case, the booster would just not be able to fit inside the Mega Bay. So that version will have to wait until 2027 or so, when the Giga Bay is expected to be up and running. And that's not me who says that, though. That's exactly what Elon said on that post on X, where he also mentioned that version 4 will actually be taller and heavier. I think that version 4 may actually stick close to these numbers, and that the taller and heavier version will probably be some sort of Block 5, version 5, whatever you want to call it. The version 4 that Elon has talked about for so long is the one that has 6 RVAC engines on the ship and goes up to 10,000 metric tons of thrust on the booster. He also thinks that will be more likely the one to go to Mars than the version 3 ship. Not a surprise, given that if version 4 starts flying in 2027, that means version 3 will only be flying next year, and it's not clear SpaceX will be able to launch to Mars in the 2026 planetary window, though for sure they're going to try. Either way, coming back a little bit closer in time, at some point we should get a ship catch back at Starbase's launch site. Now, for those of you that were hoping for one of those to occur on Flight 11, unfortunately that's not in the cards. Elon now says a ship catch would be more likely sometime between flights 13 and 15, although it'll depend on how version 3's first flights go. This isn't a surprise, given the fact that they've only gotten to one single successful re-entry and splashdown of a version 2 ship, and there's only another one remaining that will probably also splash down in the Indian Ocean. Then, Flight 12, which will be the first flight of version 3, will probably just be another suborbital flight, because it's not smart to risk a ship and a catch on a first flight. And who knows, given how version 2 went, we could see multiple attempts at getting a successful version 3 flight, though I really hope, and I'm sure all of you do too, that it goes well on the first try. In the end, only time will tell, but either way, it's probably going to be really exciting, and I can't wait to see a ship coming back here to Starbase. Now, one interesting thing that came out of the SpaceX coverage from Flight 10 was that they also acknowledged the ongoing work at Space Launch Complex 37 in Florida to turn it into another Starship launch site. This included releasing a new animation showing the 2 launch towers planned at the site. While SpaceX had already posted a render image on the website a while back, this is a proper render video. It also includes ship quick disconnect arms for both towers, which were not present in the render image on the SpaceX website. Unfortunately, it's still missing a few important things, such as, the whole entire propellant tank farm. While renders are cool, it's even cooler when physical things, in real life, actually happen. SLC-37 may take a while until it's ready for large construction, since it's only been recently that they've begun demolishing the site. But SpaceX has been way busier lately outfitting the Starship launch site at Launch Complex 39A. For example, in the last week, SpaceX put together and raised a large LR-11,000 crane at the site like the one they've got at the Starbase launch site. Given the colors of the crane pieces, we actually think this isn't this crane's first rodeo with SpaceX, and even less its first time at SpaceX's facilities in Florida. Back in 2022, when SpaceX first got serious with building Starship infrastructure in Florida, they started what we thought at the time would be the Florida Starfactory and installed the foundations for a Mega Bay at the site. To aid in construction of this Mega Bay, SpaceX bought an LR-11,000 crane that was set up and readied at the Roberts Road facility, but unfortunately, it never got used. The crane, along with all the hardware from that Mega Bay, were sent to Starbase. The pieces for the Florida Mega Bay actually turned into Mega Bay 2 here in Starbase, and that crane was instead used to build Mega Bay 2. The LR-11,000 crane looks pretty much the same as the one that I just talked about. It's pretty much all black except for the end of the boom, which was red. This large crane will probably be able to help SpaceX finalize and outfit the Starship pad at 39A, including the service structure that is now going up as we speak. Yes, after many months of waiting, that structure is now rising from the ground. This is the large structure that will be adjacent to the launch mount once everything is installed, and that we can see already at Pad 2 here in Starbase. That service structure at Pad 2 was started about 3 months before the launch mount was installed. So, maybe 39A will get its launch mount before the end of the year. A lot of other work is also ongoing at the site, with more flame trench walls now going into the flame trench, as well as a lot of concrete being poured for the ramps of the trench. This week, we also saw the delivery of the top beam that will go on top of the A-frames supporting the flame bucket for this pad. Additionally, just last week, 2 new large cryogenic tanks were delivered to the launch site to be added to the growing Starship tank farm at LC-39A. More tanks, more better. Now let's head back here to Starbase, because the launch pad work is not only happening in Florida, but also here in South Texas. Despite Flight 10 taking the spotlight and the majority of the launch site work, SpaceX still took time to test more systems for Pad 2. This included a whole lot more tank farm pump testing, and even a deluge tank farm test, which seemed to have activated part of the gas generator system for the very first time. We talked about the system in an earlier episode, but essentially it consists of up to 9 sort of combustion chambers where SpaceX will be burning oxygen and methane to drive up the pressure needed to pump the water from the deluge farm out to Pad 2. Yes, that means the system uses mini Raptors, if you want to call them that, since they burn methane and oxygen to provide this. But don't confuse them for the real deal. They're nothing like Raptor. Although, if you want to know how the real Raptor engine works, we've got the perfect video for you in our channel. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Even just the partial activation of these mini Raptors created a huge cloud, so whenever we see a Starship launching from Pad 2, it should really put on a show. In the last few weeks, SpaceX has also brought a new deluge tank to the launch site, which should further complete the system. We still expect a 6th, smaller tank to be delivered in the future for all tanks to be present, though we'll be watching out for that one on Starbase Live. SpaceX teams have also continued outfitting the pad with new hardware, including the door for the booster quick disconnect that will supply the next generation boosters with liquid methane. More protection pieces also continue to be added to the service structure next to the launch mount. Obviously, this structure will not be like it is now when Starship starts launching from Pad 2, and it will instead be enclosed in reinforced walls for protection from the fury of Super Heavy's 33 Raptor engines. In the last week, SpaceX also brought to the launch site and assembled a new crane, and this is an LR-1300.1 crawler crane. As you might have guessed based on the name, this one is smaller than the LR-11,000 crane at the launch site, but still a lot bigger in comparison to some of the other smaller ones we see around the site. Teams have also continued building the big mega bunker that is going up at the old D2 entrance to the launch site. And right across the road from that, teams have begun the foundations for the air separation unit that will be going on there. The CFA drill is on site drilling the piles for that foundation and will surely continue doing that for a few more weeks until everything is ready for construction. Another very interesting thing that came out this week related to that was a notice from the Army Corps of Engineers for the start of an environmental review to expand Starbase's launch site area to the south by an extra 21 acres. This southern expansion isn't a huge surprise because it's been part of the plans for a long time. But back in the day, the southern expansion was going to be used for the second pad at Starbase. So when SpaceX built the second pad at Starbase without using any of that southern expansion area, it was thought that it was just not in the plans anymore. But it turns out it's still very much in the plans. Just that this time it's going to be a little different. Instead, the southern expansion will allow SpaceX to turn the existing Pad 1 into the same design that we now see at Pad 2. Flight 11 will be the last flight from Pad 1 under the current design of boosters and ships, and after that, either way it'll need to be modified to support the next generation of Starships. This southern expansion will help with just that. It'll include the area for the new and extended deluge tank farm for Pad 1. It'll give enough room for a brand new flame trench, as well as additional space for more tanks for the propellant farm, and the map in the documentation shows one staging pad at each launch site, although it's kind of unclear what sort of staging will be performed from there, but I suspect they could just as easily be the little staging area that they have next to the pads now, where they put a booster or ship before they lift it onto the mount itself. But who knows, I could be wrong. Now, the connection with the air separation unit is that the extended area will also contain support equipment for methane generation and liquefaction, very similar to the kind of hardware SpaceX has proposed for the Starship launch sites in Florida. This will hugely help with replenishing the propellant tank farm and getting to the proposed 25 launches per year cadence without needing thousands and thousands and thousands of trucks. The southern expansion will also have its own road and a new entrance to the site from the roundabout that was built a few months ago, which will certainly be a sight to see once it's complete. While all of Starbase is abuzz with infrastructure work, teams are also actively working on future vehicles at different locations. At the Massey Outpost, for example, they continue scrapping the remains of Booster 13's engine section over the last few weeks. SpaceX has also continued testing the Booster 18.1 test tank at the structural test stand, aka the Super Crusher. Ever since the first test took place in early August, B18.1 has undergone a set of different cryogenic tests loaded with liquid nitrogen and being structurally tested in the stand. This test tank is being used to test the aft section of version 3 boosters, including the bottom of the large transfer tube that will be used on it. What we hadn't seen until recently was a test tank that would test the other big change for version 3, and that is the forward dome and integrated hot staging interface. That is until this week. The other day, Caesar absolutely crushed it and got a few shots of a version 3 booster forward dome and integrated hot staging interface that could be seen through the Starfactory windows. Now, you could easily think this was just a flight article, but if you zoom way in, you can see B18.3 written on it. This means that it's a booster test tank, probably a sibling of the Booster 18.1 test tank currently at the Massey Outpost. It's interesting that this is a test tank because the forward dome section that SpaceX showed during their Flight 10 coverage seemed to also be a test tank, given it had stringers over one of the grid fin openings. So maybe it is in fact the same section from that video that we now see labeled as B18.3. This week, Caesar also spotted a booster common dome barrel section staged in the Starfactory. We think that this is also a test tank because the tank vents have been capped off, a normal characteristic for what we see on test tanks. The question is whether this will be part of the Booster 18.3 test tank or if it'll be part of its own standalone test tank, like, I don't know, Booster 18.2. Next to these barrel sections is also Ship 39's nose cone, which, if you remember, recently got stacked on top of its payload bay section. Since then, teams have put up scaffolding around it and seem to have installed even more tiles on it. The scaffolding is probably there to help with that tile installation process while SpaceX waits for everything else to be ready to proceed with stacking. Now, let's go to our McGregor minute, or minutes, because this is going to be quite a spicy one. So, since the last time we checked on McGregor, SpaceX had performed 55 Raptor tests, and this included several relight tests conducted on the Raptor vertical stand on August 11th and August 27th. We've also seen a whole lot of Raptor engines passing by our cameras, including Raptor 3 serial number 35. This is the highest serial number Raptor 3 that we've seen so far. Now, Raptor testing is super interesting, but McGregor also tests a lot of other things. Here, SpaceX tested, for example, the redesigned header tanks for Block 2 ships and the Block 3 boosters. They test stuff to failure here, such as COPVs and other test tanks, and McGregor has lots of different component stands for testing such things. In the last couple of months, SpaceX has been building a rather intriguing rig at one of these test locations. This week, our friend and local, Gary Blair, flew over the McGregor test site and spotted this large test rig being put together. It's a weird-looking structure, and it has lots of scaffolding being set up around it. But it's also huge! Look at the scale of that thing compared to the people nearby. This is definitely not a dinky little thing, so there are good chances that it's probably related to Starship. In fact, next to the site is where SpaceX tested the transfer tube and header tanks for next-gen boosters, so maybe this is just the place in McGregor where Starship stuff gets tested. Let's assume for a moment that it is for Starship. What could it be for? Well, there are probably many possibilities, but one clue may have come from what was actually at this place before. During Gary's previous flyover of the site at the end of May, he spotted another rig there, much smaller than the one being built right now, but located at the same place. The old rig looked almost like a downsized version of the one being built now, with a beam connecting two columns. The interesting thing is what's in that rig. We can see there's some sort of pulley installed in the middle of the beam, and hanging from it is some sort of tray or something like that has a bunch of wires sticking out from the top. That is a really intriguing setup already on its own. What is that huge tray? Why is it being hung from that rig? What is this all for? And now, somehow they're building what appears to be a massively scaled up version of this rig, and it's being enclosed with scaffolding. Now, hear me out. Just hear me out for a second. What if this was some sort of test rig for Starship's human landing system? Yes, the Starship lunar lander for NASA. This might be a crazy theory, and I'm probably wrong, but this is why it's at the end of the episode. Last month, China tested their own lunar lander by hanging it from a test rig that allowed them to simulate lunar gravity. The rig's wires essentially worked to remove 5/6 of the Earth's gravity and simulate the moon's 1/6 gravity. The smaller rig that was used before could have been a proof of concept for the larger rig we're seeing now, or maybe it was testing equipment in a very similar manner as that Chinese test stand or anything else. But if the larger rig could also be used to carefully hang stuff from, who says they couldn't hang, for example, a short prototype human landing system lander with the minimal equipment needed for testing landing on the moon? That would be cool. Okay, that might still be a long stretch. Maybe instead it's a suite of sensors that are hung up from the rig and there's like a lunar regolith terrain simulant below or something. That could also be very valuable, since even though HLS has manual control capabilities, it needs to be able to land on the moon autonomously. Who knows? Maybe it's for something super boring. But it's a really interesting rig anyway, and we'll be keeping our eye on it for whatever happens in the future. What do you think? Are we just wishful thinking here, or is this really something related to Starship on the moon? Let us know down in the comments below. I'm sure this will certainly spark some interesting conversations. Now, Gary not only took pictures of the test rig, but also other locations such as the new Raptor South and Raptor North stands. At the Raptor North stand, there was even a Raptor 3 installed in one of the bays. But if you want to see Raptors at McGregor, the junkyard is where it's at. There are so many used Raptors here. There might be 50 or more of them, just sitting there rusting away. And those aren't the only ones. SpaceX also has a bunch of them outside of the Raptor storage hangar. Yes, the hangar from those Raptor in a building pictures. It's pretty wild to think that in the future there may just be as many, if not more, flown Raptor 3 engines out there in the McGregor junkyard, and possibly at Starbase too. With Flight 10 behind us and preparations continuing for Flight 11, it surely is exciting to see this much activity. Once again, thanks to Henson Shaving for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to visit hensonshaving.com/space and use code SPACEFLIGHT at checkout to get 100 free blades with the purchase of a razor. I mean, I just shaved today. That's smooth. Hopefully the next one will have some road closures for booster rollout and testing, and we can get pre-launch testing underway for Flight 11. Until then, Thanks for watching, and don't forget, be excellent to each other.